All right, everybody, today we're going to talk about the types of muscle contractions and how you can exercise in all three varieties. There are three types: isometric, concentric, and eccentric. And more than likely, you've probably heard this word before up here, isometric. Another way of thinking of that is a static hold. And this is when the muscle is not lengthening or shortening, it is holding still. Or, like I said, static. So isometric and static exercises are pretty much the same thing. Okay, the biggest example that everyone knows of is the plank. And the exercise is a non-moving one. You place your hands on the ground, your feet on the ground, and you hold a plank. My muscles are staying contracted in the position. They are not lengthening or shortening. And if they are, they're very, very, very minute muscles lengthening, where maybe I move like this. But ultimately, an isometric or static hold means no movement. They can be very forceful, like you can press 100% of your effort into a wall. 100%. That's static exercise. They can be very light, like I was here, and I can barely press any weight. Anywhere between full muscle contraction and practically doing nothing. Those are isometric or static. Another common one is the wall sit, where you hang out here and you exercise. They do have their place in exercising. They are useful for like rehabilitation. If you got an exercise that hurts when you move through like your shoulder or your knee through a range, then hop on the wall, go to a depth that does not hurt, and hang out here for a while. You will get a good exercise and you'll get a good workout. They're great to warm on up. They don't get the blood pumping quite as much as an actual like stretch and contraction exercise, but they're great ways to exercise nonetheless. They all have their place. Okay, as we move on to, you'll keep seeing the differences and where each type of exercise muscle contraction has its unique position in a good exercise routine. So concentric muscle contractions, these are the ones where you maybe haven't heard this word before, but it's the most recognized one. It's basically when the muscle contracts. So I easily remember this with concentric contraction. It's a small word written down here for my notes, but concentric is the muscle contraction. And a muscle contraction means the muscles are being shortened. Contractions. And that would be, we'll look at the curl, holding the weight on down, and the contraction of the bicep. That is the concentric motion of that exercise. Up. If you were doing a squat, it would be the up motion. We talked about strength curves and how those pretty much only deal with the ones that I had written on the board, only deal with the concentric portion of the exercise. That said, this is the most common one. One of the most underlooked one, and one of the maybe more important ones, is the eccentric, and that is elongation of the muscles. And I actually like to think about it another way yet, deceleration, coming down to a controlled stop. So we have two words here that I like to point out. Eccentric, you can think of it as elongating. Elongate. And deceleration, decelerating. Deceleration. Coming down to a controlled stop. And if you think about it, typically on the times people get hurt, a lot of it is on an eccentric movement. It's not always, but most common ones are like slips and falls. You come on down from a jump or you step, that should be decelerating your body weight down. And sometimes you lose balance, which throws you off, but it's still because your muscles then stretch too far. You weren't able to stop yourself. Like your ankle went from here to upside down and inside out. But if your muscles were able to control that stretch that occurred with a better eccentric contraction, you might have avoided injury. So let's look at exercises with that. I'm going to go back to the curl, and now I'm actually using a even heavier weight. I don't know if you can see that before, but I had a 10-pound for the concentric motion, and now I'm going to use a 15-pound because actually your strength becomes slightly greater with your eccentric. That'd be a little bit more in depth if I could explain it. But the idea is that I can take this and I can control the deceleration down. Right? It came down slower than gravity let it go down. I am working on that eccentric motion. I'm even going to help with the concentric and then control this down on my own. This is a great technique. You can actually do a little bit more weight than what you feel comfortable with because your muscles are pretty good at slowing down. It's hard to contract and squeeze it on up, so I'm going to use some help. But then I can control it on down. So I can work on gaining actually a bit more strength, give my muscles a really hard squeeze and control on the way down. These are actually also very good for rehabilitation exercises, prehabilitation exercises to prevent you from getting hurt in the first place. But squeezing the heck out of that bicep, chest, and shoulder, and then carefully lowering it down. Because again, I bet you if you were to pull a bicep, it would be because something got really heavy and then yanked you down before you could catch it. Maybe a kid jumped on you. Maybe it was something heavier than you thought. You pulled it off the truck, and all of a sudden you went into this position, and it pulled your bicep or you hyperextended your elbow. If you can work on your eccentric motion, that lowering down carefully, it'll be a bit more healthy and injury-proof. A little bit more, not 100%, but there is no guarantees. Let's look at one more cool one for the eccentric. We looked at the really obvious one with the bicep curl there. Another one that's, again, we talked about ankles and getting hurt on steps. The eccentric motion of a step, or you just call it a step down, where the step up portion, this is going to be the contraction of my quadricep and hamstrings and glutes to bring me up. I need to carefully lower myself down. I can do that by stepping back, and rather than just being like a drop out of control, I can slowly go down, okay? I am elongating this muscle in a very controlled manner. I can then squeeze back up. So I can do both exercises. Get down slowly. I can help myself out by dropping up this other one. I can come down slowly again. And you can do this on any side. Typically we go forward actually, which is awkward. But think about stairs, right? This is a little bit higher than a stair, but I can work on coming down out of a stair step. I can come back up. I can come on down. This is a little high for this. This is an awkward motion. I wouldn't do it with a bunch of weight on my back until I got really good. But I would still work on the eccentric motion. Down and back up. You can do it to the side. The biggest takeaway message of this is like the slow. Slow, slow, slow down. You can do it with a squat. You could load up a bar and do it. You might be safer to do it with a deadlift, like just rank off the bar and then carefully lower yourself down. It doesn't really work well with those exercises. It can be done under a safe and really well-controlled situation. I've seen it done. But you're better off with step-ups or possibly just lunges where you go down really slow, or holding on to a set of rings and doing a one-legged variation, because that's pretty challenging. It also challenges the balance. So along with harping on the decelerating portion of eccentric, that would be something like coming to a stop. So another great one, instead of just doing one-legged, is a step down with two. And you want to be as quiet as possible because you want to control that eccentric motion. And you're down, and that's essentially an eccentric motion. As I came down to a stop, I decelerated. My muscles stretched, but still were able to control that stretching and ultimately stop. If I wasn't able to stop, I'd fall all the way down to the floor and you're hurt. So you work on just a little bit of height, squatting down, coming up strong. You can change it on up. And ultimately you can go from a little bit higher or jump a little bit higher. The eccentric work is really important. Even if it's just simply walking down and coming on into it. or slowing down your exercise. Let's see. Moving back up to isometric just for some fun ones, because concentric are pretty obvious. The isometric ones are a little less obvious. We got plank, we got wall sits, but basically any of your balance exercises or like a handstand, those all become like isometric. So you can do goofy things like arm balances and ways to progress your exercises. So you can do hovers, like isometrics, like right here, squat just a little bit off. That's a great way to do it instead of the wall. You got your planks on any sort of height. Then you have like, just balances. These are all isometric exercises because they require very little movement and exercise, just muscle contraction for the most part. So, as a real quick review, types of muscle contractions: isometric, static holds; concentric, the contraction portion of the exercise. It's most recognizable for most people. And the eccentric, which I would actually debate being one of the more important ones, and injury prevention. You can think of eccentric, or the elongating of the muscle, or the deceleration, stopping of the muscles. One more time. Isometric, concentric, eccentric. Isometric, static; concentric, contraction; eccentric, elongate, decelerate. Muscle contractions. Have a good one.